Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, sponsored by Fortinet, we talk about IoT and OT risks and how to mitigate them. One option from Fortinet is FortiLink NAC. This is a free feature that can help you segment and protect IoT and OT devices and can even help you deploy virtual patches. Another option is FortiNAC, a full-bore NAC solution. We'll get into the differences between the two offerings, how they work, and how to decide which one is a better fit for your network. Our guests from Fortinet are Chris Hinsz, Senior Director, Product and Solutions, Secure Connectivity, and James Allen, Senior Director of Product Marketing and Solutions, LAN Access, and Zero Trust. James and Chris, thanks for being here. So first off, IT and OT networks have lived in separate worlds for ages. Why is it that OT systems like industrial controls and sensors and other things are now starting to fall under IT's remit?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've seen a trend over the last several years where IT teams are being asked to begin to take over some of the OT-based networks administration, specifically because whereas OT networks previously were air-gapped, meaning they had no access to the internet or to other networks, now we're seeing them enabling access for the purposes of management, of proactive maintenance, vendors coming in and being able to maintain their equipment. And so now these OT systems need to fall under security policies that they may not have previously fallen under.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's a chunk of the network that before everyone had been content to just leave be on its own.
Yeah.
Now there's an expectation that it needs to be beholden to what IT is doing throughout the rest of the company.
And my understanding is OT devices, particularly on the industrial side, I'm not thinking about like printers or something, they present a different risk. So what might IT not be familiar with in terms of the risk profile of these devices?
Yeah, they're dealing with very sensitive environments, as you can imagine. I mean, manufacturing floors, but then they're also dealing with, the things that affect our day-to-day lives, water treatment plants, other areas where, something going wrong in those environments can have a very negative effect. So when you look at the need to protect these environments while still enabling them to perform at the best of their capability, looking at the network and providing appropriate segmentation and looking at these devices and their patch levels is key. A lot of these OT systems, they're running older code. They obviously can't be taken offline to be patched. So it's a very big challenge for a lot of these administrators to tackle.
Yeah, James, I think, what you touched on there, the idea of being always on, these OT systems can never have downtime, or when they do, it is highly planned, highly scheduled, and it's only happening once every, long length of time. It really means that patching or updating code is something that oftentimes is really avoided when at all possible. Certainly, we as Fortinet, we always encourage people to ensure that you have the latest patches. We want to ensure everybody is fully secure, but we do understand that can make a real challenge for OT systems where they cannot afford for things to be down any longer than a small service window.
And my understanding is a lot of these devices you can't, put an agent on, so you can't run a local firewall or anti-malware or anything.
That's
You
correct.
just need to leave these devices alone, essentially.
Yeah, that's correct. And we see that not only in OT environments, we see that often in IoT environments as well, where it's very challenging to put some type of code or sensor on a IoT or OT device.
So let's dive in then. FortiLink NAC. What is it, and what protection is it providing for the IoT and OT realm?
Yeah, FortiLink NAC is a feature within our secure LAN solution at Fortinet. It is specifically for Fortinet equipment, so our switches and our APs that are managed through FortiOS. And what we're able to do, we know that network administrators, whether they be administrating an OT network or a small or medium business or a distributed enterprise, continue to struggle with identifying and controlling devices on their network. And so this feature was developed with Fortinet being a very much security-focused company to enable them to be able to deploy NAC whereas had been in a challenge before because of the use of .1x and architectural challenges. This free feature basically enables you to, with a few clicks of a button, identify the devices that are coming onto the network and
Mhm.
automate the onboarding of those devices into secure policies. So not just segmentation, not just putting them into a separate VLAN, but also being able to even microsegment and implement layer 7 policies all the way down to the port level and the WLAN level.
And James, it also allows us to extend some of those great FortiGuard services, such as our IoT recognition, as well as OT services, to help keep the latest device updates in mind, and therefore leverage those in the recognitions and some of the rules that can be implemented in FortiLink NAC.
And just to be clear, this is a feature that's available if I'm using Fortinet switches and Fortinet APs in my network.
That's exactly it. So if you're using Forti switches and Forti APs that are managed through FortiOS, this feature is free to you. It's not licensed, and it's available out of the box. The profiling functionality is based in FortiOS, and the control is enabled by that management of FortiOS of our switches and APs, extending that layer 7 control all the way down to the switch port and WLAN. Now, for environments that don't have our Forti switches or Forti APs, we actually do offer a product called FortiNAC, which enables you to have the same level of control, similar to what you would see with some competitors out in the marketplace for multi-vendor environments.
Okay, yeah, we'll get into FortiNAC in a minute, but let's stick with FortiLink NAC for now. So again, it's a free feature with if I'm using Fortinet APs and switches. When I think of NAC, I think of 802.1x, as you mentioned. I think of supplicants, but as you mentioned, you don't need that with FortiLink NAC.
No, you're leveraging the same functions that drive our overall secure LAN solution, which is FortiOS managing and controlling our switches and APs. And with that, because we have that layer 7 visibility, we're able to profile devices and automate the onboarding and control into secure policies.
And when you say identifying the devices, how are you able to do that?
So we're able to profile within FortiOS. So FortiOS is a layer 7 capable firewall. So we're looking at, everything from, the device coming at, say the link light comes in, we're looking at the MAC address of the device.
Mhm.
We're looking at what traffic is attempting to pass. We're looking at even things like its DHCP request, and we're determining what that device is based on that. We also, additionally, for the carpeted space, all those profiles are built in. When you start to move into OT, because there's such a plethora of devices out there, we actually have a service as part of our FortiGuard OT service that enables you to identify even more devices specific to an OT environment. But basically, it's profiling that is part of the FortiGate that enables small and medium businesses and distributed enterprise to enable this technology in the carpeted space.
So I mentioned virtual patching in my intro. What is virtual patching and how is it applied to my use of FortiLink NAC?
Virtual patching is a very interesting feature that we're able to offer in conjunction with FortiLink NAC. The feature is actually part of FortiOS and our FortiGuard services. What we're able to do is, because we're actually seeing the device and the traffic it's passing, we're also able to scan it for vulnerabilities as well. So we're able to determine if a device actually has a vulnerability to a known vulnerability. As you know, Fortinet is a leading security vendor, and so we keep track of a variety of different vulnerabilities, and we track them with CVEs, commonly
Mhm.
in the industry, that gives us an ability to know the kill chain for a particular vulnerability. So when we detected a vulnerability on a device, what we're able to do is to develop a patch that will address that specific vulnerability. Now, what FortiLink NAC does for us is it enables us to implement that patch all the way down at the port level or on the WLAN level. So we're able to implement that patch closer to where the device is. And we're able to set those policies up to where they can not just segment them, with this particular policy, but we can go so far as to micro-segment if necessary, based on the vulnerability and the vulnerability level.
And one of the nice things about this takes dealing with a vulnerability on a piece of equipment. And you think about some of those OT environments you were mentioning earlier, where taking a piece of equipment offline can be highly problematic. This changes a critical vulnerability on a piece of equipment from being a fire drill of having to deal with it and trying to wonder what you're going to do to being a planned methodology, thinking about your next service window, roll an update into that plan for that next service window, and have the downtime be a planned activity, knowing that you have virtually patched in the short term. Very, very different than a mad scramble when you find out a vulnerability and you need to make sure that you are not compromised, but don't have any other tools at your disposal in order to handle that vulnerability.
Yeah, it's not as if we're saying this is a replacement for patching a device. We really strongly encourage, as the first line of defense, to patch devices. However, just as Chris said, often in OT environments, you can't take that device offline. But it's not just OT environments. We all have been in IT for a long time. We know there's sometimes a server sitting underneath someone's desk that hasn't been touched and can't be touched. And you want to be able to implement some level of protection for that device to make sure that it's not compromised.
And is a virtual patch then essentially kind of like an IDS signature? Like this OT device has this potential exploit, so I'm looking for some kind of something in the payload of inbound traffic aimed toward that device, and I'm just going to block that attempt to connect. Or what is a virtual patch? Can you get into more detail?
So it's going to depend, right? Because what we're doing is we're looking for a vulnerability that's already been identified, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
example, it's a listed vulnerability. It's got a CVE, and so once we determine what those vulnerabilities are, it's going to vary what that patch looks like based on that CVE. So it may be blocking of certain command and control aspects, right? Certain ports, but it's going to vary based on that CVE. Each one has got an individual kill chain, and what we're looking at is what do we need to put into place to eliminate the ability for that exploit to be activated.
That's correct, James. We really will tailor the compensating controls to match how that particular vulnerability is exploited.
Got it. So that's we've been talking about FortiLink NAC. You've also got a FortiNAC offering, which is different from FortiLink NAC. Can you get into how FortiNAC differs?
Yeah, absolutely. FortiNAC is a full-featured NAC product, right? NAC is a very mature market. There are a number of vendors in this space, and the demands of that space, whether it be the use of DOP1X, the ability to be able to manage multi-vendor networks, and so on, that need exists. And we have a lot of our customers out there who maybe they don't have a Fortinet end-to-end Fortinet network. Maybe they're thinking about going to an end-to-end Fortinet network, but they're not there. They're not there now. We also have customers, OT customers, for whom that is just not going to be realistic. They have, a variety of different switch vendors and so on that they may be using. For that purpose, FortiNAC gives them the ability to have that level of control and integrate them into our security fabric. So we're able to do additional functionality like virtual patching, but then the patch, rather than being implemented on the switch port or at the WLAN level, is there at the firewall itself or at FortiOS level itself. And so FortiLink NAC is a free feature that's offered just for an end-to-end Fortinet solution. FortiNAC offers a multi-vendor option for our customers, as well as additional expanded capabilities, anomaly detection, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so if I've got vendor A's switches and vendor B's APs, but I still want a NAC solution, FortiNAC would integrate. FortiNAC is the solution I would go to.
Exactly.
What about things like ICE or ClearPass? If I've already got that deployed as well, can I still use FortiNAC?
Typically, you're going to have one vendor that you're choosing to control those switches and those APs. I will say, for example, for something like ICE, it is specific to Cisco equipment. ClearPass can be used in a variety of different environments, but there are some .1x requirements there. Fortinet doesn't have those .1x requirements. It can use .1x, but it can also use other means to be able to control those switches and access points, making it a little bit easier to deploy than some of the other solutions out there. That integration piece, though, usually there's got to be just one control for your wired and wireless network. The only time we've seen it be otherwise is one controls wireless and the other controls switching, but that's rare. We haven't seen that very often. I don't know if you agree with that, Chris, but I haven't seen that very often.
No, I usually see people kind of settle on the one that they're planning to use. Definitely, as we kind of move, as you talked about, James, as we've seen customers maybe move upon their journey with Fortinet, it is not uncommon for them to move to Fortinet as kind of part of that move as they plan to slowly migrate products over time into the security fabric. And Fortinet, as you called out, James, is a great way in the interim to tie older vendor product that you are planning to replace in the next 2 to 3 years into the fabric in the short term until you can have a full Fortinet stack.
We've also seen it go the other way, where we've seen customers who have initially implemented FortiLink NAC across their enterprise, and then they are looking for some of the more additional features that perhaps Fortinet offers, and have upgraded from FortiLink NAC to Fortinet. Perhaps they've become larger, or they've integrated another company or something along those lines. But we have seen that transition as well, where people go from the feature to the product, depending on what their needs are.
And just to clarify one last point, the virtual patching I can get with FortiLink NAC, but also FortiNAC.
Yes, it just all comes down to where the patch is deployed, right? The patch is deployed in a FortiLink NAC scenario. That patch is deployed as close to the edge as you can get. It's deployed on the switch port or on the WLAN. Whereas when we're looking at it from a FortiNAC perspective, it's deployed at the FortiGate. So depending on where the FortiGate is placed in that scenario is where the patch would be implemented.
Well, James and Chris, we're at the end of our time together. If folks are curious about FortiNAC, FortiLink NAC, or anything else, where should they go?
Well, we would highly encourage you to go out to our website, www.fortinet.com/LANedge, and that will give you a wealth of information about this feature as well as the overall solution from Fortinet.
All right, that's fortinet.com/LANedge. We'll have that link in the show notes. Also, for folks who may not be familiar with Fortinet's switch and AP portfolio, we also did a Tech Bites on that, so we'll drop that link in the show notes as well if you want to go get all this information. But in the meantime, thank you, Chris and James, for joining us, and thank you to Fortinet for being a longtime sponsor. Sponsors do make everything we do here at Packet Pushers possible. Speaking of everything we do, you can find this and many more fine, free technical podcasts and our community blog. It's all at packetpushers.net. You can hear us on Spotify, and if you would, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.